Welcome to the panel for Welcome to the Wizarding World deck building. We're going to be talking with the design team here at the OP about all the cool things we do with Harry Potter, mainly focusing on our deck building games. I'm Ross Thompson. I'm a marketing manager here at the OP, and I'm a Hufflepuff. Pat?
I'm Pat Marino, the game design manager at the OP, and I am a Ravenclaw.
Cami?
Hi, Cami Mandell. I have been doing game design at the OP for 5 years and been here playing games and building them out since '98, so 20 plus years. And I am a Gryffindor.
And I'm up.
Yep, you're up.
I'm Sean Fletcher. I am a game designer here at the OP. I've been doing this for 8 years. The last 2 have been with the OP. And I am somewhere between Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, so we'll go with Ravelpuff.
Ravelpuff, excellent, excellent. So when I first came to the OP, we were just coming out with our Harry Potter deck building game. And since then, the game has done a fantastic job of bringing the OP more into the hobby space, and then also introducing Harry Potter fans to board games, and then also providing a wonderful kind of intro into deck building, but also at the same time, like it builds and grows as the game has boxes. We'll go into that in a little bit, but you go through each movie, which is super cool. At the same time, the game has recently gone from being in game stores to now in larger outlets, which is really cool, and it's really kind of expanded the growth of gaming to a lot of people that normally wouldn't do it, but because it's Harry Potter, that kind of gives it a wonderful thing. We are one of the main Harry Potter publishers too. We do so many games for Harry Potter, from Hogwarts Battle to Defense Against the Dark Arts to House Cup Competition to Clue to Trivial Pursuit, a bazillion puzzles. So we know Harry Potter, but part of that also is that we are fans as well, which we're going to dive into, which is going to be really exciting. So I think really it kind of goes into is the Wizarding World on the tabletop. What is so cool that, like, what is so cool about that? Like, why do we get to play in that space? Kind of open with a fun question. Cami, go first.
Really what it does is it brings people together. And Harry Potter already was designed to show about teamwork and everything else. And so Harry Potter on the table is just a perfect fit for fans of all ages. And what I love about our Harry Potter games is, even though all the packages have a nod to the fact that you can't go to Hogwarts until you're 11 plus, they're really all family games. You can play them, with those younger kids. You can play them with, your teens, and you can play them with your friends that are all adults, and everybody has a good time. It doesn't matter how old you are. It just brings people together.
Cool. So I like our panel yesterday, feel free to hop in and talk. It's more roundtable-esque than it is just me asking questions. Pat, what do you think?
Yeah, I would add to that. For me, like as with almost any licensed game, part of it is creating an interactive experience. And with Harry Potter, what's really so special about it is, like, everybody who's a Harry Potter fan wants to go to Hogwarts, right? Like, that is the dream, is for this all to be real and for you to get that letter from an owl saying you can go and learn magic and do all these things. And while that, as far as we know, isn't really a thing, it's the opportunity to do that with your friends around the table and to say, like, okay, we're going to take on the role of these characters, or in some of our games, we're going to play as ourselves and go into the Wizarding World and play the spell cards and battle the Death Eaters and do all these things. And what I like is that there's also this opportunity, like, as we introduce ourselves with our house, right? That's a big part of the Wizarding World is what is your identity within the space. And there's some opportunity to either play as a character from your house or play as your house, depending on the game that you're choosing, and to kind of get into that role and mindset. And I think it's really unique too, to have a game where there's factions in the IP, but those factions are all on the same side. Mm-hmm. So usually we see something like a Risk game or whatever, where, okay, there's 5 factions in the game, but they all are at war. And in this case, it's like, well, I can proudly say I'm a Ravenclaw, but still team up with a Hufflepuff, a Gryffindor, and a Slytherin, and still battle against this great villain of Voldemort and have that experience that I'm, like, helping out.
I think part of what makes the Harry Potter world so great for tabletop gaming, both for the experience of the gaming and for us as designers, is how deep and rich that world really is. It gives us so much space to play in and it gives the gamers so much space to play in, that it's not just about what characters are you playing as, but it's also what characters and what stories are you playing with. And I think that depth is something that really brings people back to it again and again and again.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think from all the games we do, from Rising and deck building and so on, there's a diverse amount of characters from the Harry Potter world, right? If you're not always, even though for deck building you mainly are playing as Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville, we've got a lot of other games where if you play as, you can get Tonks and Hagrid, and then I like with Defense Against the Dark Arts, where you're not playing as anybody, right? You're just playing as your house, and that's really cool too. So, and then I mean, I can discuss about this all day, which is kind of the whole point of this panel. So let's jump into Hogwarts Battle. So that's kind of our flagship Harry Potter game, and we have a new expansion that's coming out, Charms and Potions. So there's the base game, Hogwarts Battle, then there's Monster Box of Monsters, and then coming soon is Charms and Potions, and then along with it we have the 2-player Dueling Club game. Cammie, kick us off. Tell us about Hogwarts Battle.
So kind of my favorite thing about Hogwarts Battle was something that wasn't supposed to be. It was all supposed to be, you open it up and you see this mountain of cards in front of you and start playing the game. And really my favorite part is how we slowly introduced the rules so that we could bring new people into the board gaming community by appealing to the Harry Potter fan without having to appeal just to the gamer Harry Potter fan. And so for me, my favorite part is the fact that it opens up, you open up the box and you see 7 games within. So there's all those smaller boxes. You get to slowly learn about it, and you get to relive each and every year of Hogwarts as our characters would have done.
Yeah, I think thematically it fits super well. It's like, when the students started right in year 1, they only knew very little. And then the game does the same thing. It's like, this is all you need to know to play is these basic things. And then box 2, here's some new rules, here's some new cards, here's some new stuff, and you progress through. But I also think one of the things that's been interesting is, like, of course, in that first box, like, you want the full Hogwarts experience. You want all 7 years and they're there. But even as we've seen fans go through that, they reach the end, they're like, okay, yeah, we finished that, but what else you got? Like, I've learned all this. I've mastered this level of gameplay. I started out as maybe somebody with very little gaming experience. I ended like, yeah, we can beat game 7 any day of the week. We've got this thing mastered. And as Fletcher was saying, like, the world is so deep that, we've been able to come up with, and Cammie's done a really great job of this, of like Monster Box and now Charms and Potions. Like, what other aspects of the story can we tell? And even Defense Against the Dark Arts, where you're looking at, really, it's down to that one scene where the students are practicing their dueling, right? And you can take something like that, but because there's so much story behind the learning and how the dueling happens, and so many characters you can bring in, you can make a whole game that kind of is reminiscent of that one scene, but all of the stuff that was happening around it too in the universe. So I think it's always interesting when we start talking about, like, oh, can we do another expansion? Like, my first inclination is, I think we've covered everything there is in this universe. And then the next thing you know, we have this like whole robust, like, new mechanics and all these different things going on. That's like, oh no, we've only started tapping this well. So we'll see where we go in the future. But, obviously with like going in a different direction with House Cup and Death Eaters Rising and all these different things, like, there's a lot of ways we can go at this, and lots of content that we can keep tapping as the deck builder continues to grow.
I think for me, the coolest thing about our multiple Hogwarts Battle deck building games now is that it starts as that learning experience, and it really uses the metaphor of going to Hogwarts year by year as a way to teach people a game. When we first worked on this engine, it really was meant to be sort of a my first deck builder, with a really basic entry point for people who were just getting into gaming. And then when the Harry Potter license was brought to it, Cammie's notion of breaking it into those 7 years, 7 games, really just hits home the start as a beginner, but work your way up towards being an expert as you play these games. And then when the 2 expansions jump in, and they're really strategically deep expansions. They are not easy games to play. It takes all of that knowledge of deck building that you've built in your 7 years of Hogwarts training to really put you into those situations where you're going to have to fight to win those games.
So I totally agree, and we'll kind of dive deeper into that a little bit. So for the Hogwarts battle, which villain combinations do you think are the most challenging in just the base game?
Oh, Lucius Malfoy, if
Yep.
he comes out with the Basilisk and the Dementor, to me, like, I can deal with Bellatrix, who makes you reveal an additional dark arts, but not healing and having the villains get healed, oh, that is such a brutal combination.
Is it Barty Crouch who prevents you from taking the control off of the locations? I think it's Barty Crouch.
I think so.
Yeah.
He is brutal. I really dislike dealing with him because so much of the strategy in the later games is just managing that threat level. And when you can't do that, it can snowball on you really fast.
Yeah, I feel like that's part of the, and we've talked about this in other panels, is like when designing and working on co-op games, right? Is like, okay, you've got these different things you have to manage so you don't lose. And then like we end up with villains who say, okay, but that thing, you can't manage it, right? So Barty's saying you can't manage control. And, you know, Lucius is saying, well, no, you need to damage these villains, but I'm not going to let you because I'm just going to keep healing them. And they end up becoming like the most notorious. Like when you look at Board Game Geek and other places for comments, it's always like, I'm trying to do this very direct thing, and you've created a thing that stops me from doing that until I deal with it, and I don't like that. And it's like, yeah, you're not supposed to.
Yeah, that's the whole point.
Right there.
Well, I also like how those unforgivable curses that are in the Dark Arts deck snowball so rapidly. I mean, you get an Imperio followed by a Cruciatus, followed by a Avada Kedavra, and suddenly you're pulling 17, it feels like, Dark Arts cards in one turn. I think the most I saw was poor Brian, who had 11 at one time. And
Gross.
Oh, it was awful. We were on location 3 to begin with, so he had to pull a base 3. Bellatrix was out, and he hit more unforgivable curses in a row than I thought was humanly possible.
No.
I mean, we were all starting to laugh, though, because I've never seen such a run of bad luck all at once.
Oh, that's horrible. That's funny. So on a flip note, though, base game, who's some of your favorite cards to pull out? Obviously, there's allies and there's items and there's spells, but is there anything that really jumps out as some of your favorite cards?
I love Snape just for flavor. I think Snape has always been one of my favorite characters in the story because you just never knew if which side he was fighting for until the very end. And to pretty clearly define him in this game as a hero, to me, felt like he finally got his moment.
That's good. It's no crazy question there, but kind of the funny thing that just popped in my head was we were talking with Travis Chance at Gamma, and he was saying how his little girls love playing Hogwarts Battle, but if Dumbledore comes out, they'll totally tank whatever's happening in the game.
Oh,
so
yeah.
they can get Dumbledore on their team, right?
Well,
We saw the same thing with the equivalent card in the Toy Story deck builder, right? There's a very similar kind of card, and it was always like, nope, if that's out, it's just who can get it first, and everybody wants it. And it's like, I mean, it's Dumbledore, right? Like,
you gotta get Dumbledore.
You got to admit, he's got style, right? So everybody's like, I got to have Dumbledore on my team because it feels like for some reason, if you have him, you just win. Like, even though that's not the case, it's like, no. Well, if we can just get Dumbledore, who's going to stop us?
Right. Yeah.
Well, and putting Dumbledore in the first box was so, I don't know, forward thinking is, I guess, what I'm going to say of us, because it's so hard to get 8 influence on your very first game. And so to have him out there, he's almost taunting the players from the very beginning and saying, hey, I am here to help you. You just have to have enough, resources or guts to ask me for help. And of course, as kids, we're all like, oh, but he's a teacher. I can't talk to him right now. And so it's kind of one of those things. It's like when you finally get him on your side, you just feel so powerful.
So I'm just going to dive more deeper. So there's a theme that happens with our Harry Potter games that I don't know if people notice around. Cammie, what are some of the fun Easter eggs that you've hidden in the Harry Potter games?
Oh, for me, it's really about theme. So everything I do comes down to what does it do. So, you know, every spell, every wand motion is actually accurate. Like I have watched every single scene where that spell is cast, I don't know how many times. And if they didn't have an approved wand motion that actually existed, because if you go to the Wizarding World parks, you can over there and you know exactly what the wand motion is and your wands interact. If they didn't, we had to watch the scene, draw the wand motion that was made on screen and send it to Warner Brothers and say, can you approve this wand motion to be used in the game? So for me, most people won't notice it, but it is actually true to the movie and true to what was happening and going on there.
That's cool. That's really fun. And then all of our games. So what age do you get your Hogwarts letter at, right? Like,
Well, 11. So everything's 11 plus, and it doesn't matter. You have to be 11 to go to Hogwarts. You have to be 11 to play the games. Now, did I play them with my 8-year-old? Of course, but we had to remind her letter didn't actually come in the mail yet.
That's so funny. Awesome. So as people completed the base game for deck building, then we looked at adding our first expansion for Monster Box of Monsters. That game is hard.
I know. I'm sorry.
So
I love it.
So what were you guys looking at adding in when you wanted to do that first expansion? Like what kind of things came out that made, hey, we want to put this into the game? Open question.
First of all, we wanted to introduce the banish mechanic, which is our way of culling cards from your deck. For a beginner deck builder, that is a very contradictory term. I want to build the best deck I can. Why do I want to take cards out of it? And it's hard to understand that concept. And so we talked about adding it in the later games, but still didn't feel like it was the right time. So when we had Monster Box, we wanted to tell the story that we hadn't told so far, which is focus on the villains, but we also wanted to add that culling mechanic. And we thought, well, what better way than to take them out into the Forbidden Forest, show off those creatures, but we all know that going into the forest is gonna get you detention. It's out of bounds, you're not supposed to be there. So we added a way to cull cards, but we added a penalty for everything that you were doing. And it makes the game so much harder and a lot more fun and a lot more immersive. I feel like there's a lot more just theme that rolls out when you get to the Monster Box.
Yeah, I think one of the things I like about it is the way influence is used as well. That you've got these creatures that, like, it makes sense, right? If you're a hero, you're not going to go out and like, let's attack the creatures and kill them all. Like that's not very Harry Potter, right? Like it wouldn't feel the right way to do it. But it's like, okay, I've got this influence. I'm trying to get a card, but I can also put one onto this creature. But if I do that, then maybe I can't quite afford the card I want. But you can only do so much with influence in terms of the creatures per turn. So you've got this like, well, if I don't do it, like that's a rare opportunity. Like it's a slow grind. We have to get that done. But is it a better long-term investment, to get that card that's 5 influence rather than getting a card that's 4 and throwing an influence on this creature or, whatever the case may be. So I like that there's like a new form of tension and decision-making that comes into the expansion so that people who've played, through the first box, and I'm always surprised how many people are like, oh yeah, we've played through all 7 boxes multiple times while we were waiting for the expansion to come. Because my vision, and thought when I first heard about the game, which was before I was at the app, is like, it's legacy style. People will play it and say like, I'm done. And it's like, I'm done.
That is not the
playing
case.
it through as Harry Potter. Now it's time to play it through as Ron.
Yeah.
Fire it up again. Yeah. Which is really cool to see. But I like that with each expansion, we're able to offer something different, and obviously Defense Against the Dark Arts was, now you can do that thing. I remember one of the early tests, we had outside testers come into the office, and it was a couple, and we were like, you're going to try this new game we're working on, and it's Hogwarts Battle universe, but you get to fight each other. And it was this like married couple of super fans who were like, finally, like they were so game to like destroy each other. I was like, okay.
Oh, my favorite playtest ever, and I know which couple you're talking about. And he's like, oh, I win by attacking? And Yes. Okay. So he comes out of the gate ready to attack, guns blazing. And she's like, what's this new hex thing? And I'm like, oh, it's a new type of card. You put it in your opponent's deck. Well, okay, I'm going to try that. I'm going to just test it out. Oh, he won the first 2 games just hands down. And she came back and won the last 3 games in a row just with her hex strategy. And he goes, I hate these cards. And she's like, oh, I love these cards. And I could just see the conversation happening afterwards in the car on the way home as they recreate each moment. And that's what we really want, too, for these games, is that you still feel like you're living in that universe, even when the game gets packed back up into the box.
Well, it's that aspect that, like, everything you're looking at is familiar, right? If you've played box 1 of Hogwarts Battle, then you're seeing things that are familiar all the way back to the basic aspects of the game, the card layouts, the iconography, the way the whole system works. But also there's something new that, you've kind of internalized all the other rules of the game, and there's this actual mechanism to be really excited about. So whether it was, dealing with the creatures, dealing with hexes and battling each other, or, some stuff that I won't spoil in the new box, that it's like, oh, there's this whole new thing I get to think about and try and mess with and experiment with. I think just builds that whole experience for fans of like, okay, this feels really fresh, exciting, and new, but also still tapping into everything I love about the game so far.
I think the Monster Box did that as well, with the added challenges that aren't directly the monsters and the villains to beat. When you have to, purchase so many odd numbered cards in a single turn, or assign damage in ways that you wouldn't normally want to assign that damage, just because that's what the challenge at the moment is. That was sort of an innovation in that game that I think really affected in a great way the way you have to think about playing the game. Your old strategies that worked in games 6 and 7 of Hogwarts Battle base set don't always work when you've got those extra challenges there on the table.
Well, and the other thing with those encounter cards is that you have a specific set of villains and creatures you have to shuffle up to make your villain deck. Mm-hmm. You don't get to play with everything. So you don't get your Crab and Goyles and your Draco Malfoys, who are so tame that people want to stop at. You're lucky if those are in your villain deck at this point in time. You're like, oh, thank goodness. All I get penalized is 1 health here. Mm-hmm. I'll take it. That tighter villain deck really makes the game, ramps up that tension a lot faster.
So to what Fletcher was saying, I just want to add on to, like, one of the things I love about those extra challenges too is that, like, when you have your game 6 and 7 strategy, it's sort of like, I play the healer, you play the attacker, like, we kind of take our roles, or however you want to approach that, and everybody kind of feels like they have their way of contributing. But suddenly there's like this new thing where if you weren't always the heavy attack person who is damaging the villains, you can still kind of take out these cards that are a challenge in a different way with a different aspect of your deck, where you feel like, oh, I did this very tangible. I got rid of that thing. And I did it in a way that you couldn't do things before. So, like, everybody has different pathways to feel like the hero. And I really like that element to it. Is like, oh, everybody playing in a cooperative game can say, well, this is how I tangibly contributed to the victory. And you don't end up with that sort of quarterbacking thing where it was like, yeah, well, I mean, we all basically supported one guy who was the attacker, and then they won the game. It's like, no, I did this thing and they did that, and we all contributed in different ways. And I think that's really fun to see people find different pathways to that contribution, to feeling like they were really part of that linchpin that, like, got you past the last hurdle to get you to the victory. And it creates those memories that you're still talking about, like, months later, of like, that one game where this happened and then I balanced it that way. So that's really fun to see.
Which is good. So, and then after that, now we started teasing out a little bit more for Charms and Potions. So this will be coming out in a few weeks. So I know we're recording it a little earlier from when it's going to be previewing. But we're pretty excited. It's going to be adding in a new character, going to be adding in some new stuff. Do you guys want to give a brief overview without getting too spoilery for it, for Charms and Potions?
So immediately you get to have a brand new thing, which is a charm board in front of you. And every character gets to build out their player board. They nest into what you already had. they had a really cool, the player boards had a cool shape anyway that was almost puzzle piece-ish, and these fit just perfectly into interlocking into there. But your charm ability is tied to your health. And what I love now is where everybody was before really gung-ho, let's keep everybody healthy. We want to make sure that nobody gets stunned. In this game, your best ability comes when you're closest to being stunned. But if you get all the way stunned, you get nothing. And so there's a real push and pull as to how far do I chance it going into my turn, or do I let the person playing before me heal me up a little bit just in case I flip over a bad dark arts card or something else. It's just a fun new mechanic. It's really cool and gives you something new to do on your turn. And that doesn't even talk about the new player. So I'll let somebody else introduce her.
Well, and just to kind of run off of the charms board, I think one of the really cool side effects of that charms board in the play testing was that I've never seen players say the words, "No, don't heal me yet," before. And that was something that came up quite a bit, was that if you've got a character who can heal everyone at once, sometimes all of a sudden you're looking at the board going, yeah, but if you do that, we won't get the benefit of this effect because I'm at 3 health, and if I'm at 4 health, I don't get as good an effect.
Yeah, or even the decision making, right? Of like, okay, I can heal one person and 2 players are both at low health. Who do you choose? Well, instead of it just being, oh, your turn's next, so I'll heal you, or another person has a healing ability, so you're kind of saying like, oh, well, we can sequence it this way. It's like, no, heal that person, leave me weak, because my ability is more timely right now, that if I use it and use my charm effectively, it's going to be really interesting. Yeah, I can't wait till we can talk about the potion stuff too, because I really enjoy that.
Yeah, it'll be good. We'll have to do something very similar to this once that game's been out a little bit. We don't want to get too deep into it. But it is neat to kind of see how those all add together. How many games? There's 4 in this one, right?
There's 4 more boxes in this one, each with their own set of encounters, new villains to battle. What I like is that you don't have to play this after you play Monster Box. You can play them in either order, and you can integrate it. You could play a game of Hogwarts Battle, add in the Charms and Potion, play one of Monster Box, and mix and match it however you want to make it really your game for your game night.
Cool. So that's so that we have that. I'm really excited to jump into that. Next is we've kind of chatted about it a little bit, but Defense Against the Dark Arts. Which has been one we've kind of chatted about here and there. It was this neat little, how do we get a dueling game into there? It evolved and moved. What were the thoughts behind creating that game? Why did we want to bring that experience to the tabletop? Pat.
I was just going to say, like, the 2 things that jumped out at me were like, it's a 2-player experience, right? Which I think for a lot of our fans, like, depending on different situations, it's like, a player and their significant other is their consistent game group, or, a parent and a kid who are the gamers in the family who, they need those 2-player experiences, and that's what they really wanted. Is like a game designed specifically for that. But also I think it's competitive, right? Like, there was sort of that request of, okay, we've been doing this thing together, but I think we can probably all point to at least one gamer we know who's like, co-ops, I don't play those. I need to win, and I need to win against somebody in the room so they can look sad. And this kind of gave the opportunity to do that, which is really interesting to see, and took some doing to make that feel appropriate to the Harry Potter universe, while still giving the flexibility to use all these different allies and characters and spells, where it wasn't just like, well, one person always has to be Voldemort. It gives the flexibility as a dueling game, as a practice kind of scenario, to actually be you. And okay, it's Ross going to Hogwarts and getting his house assigned and then playing to that strength. So that was a really cool aspect too, I think.
Cool. Well, then we'll just skip right ahead. So when we released Hogwarts Battle at Gen Con, that was an experience.
It might be, one of my favorite days. It's in the top 10 here of that excitement and the passion of the fans when we released that game. That day was it just stands out. I mean, it is so memorable, and to see the crowd and to see the reaction of people's, because we had no idea what this game was going to do. We flew in copies from the production facility and had never once played it with people in a real physical game. We'd had, prototypes and things like that, but this was the first time to see people actually respond to the final game, and it was amazing and overwhelming.
Yeah, that was Fletch. What do you think?
It was my first Gen Con experience as well, and if you'll forgive me for a second, I've got to close a window here because there's some noise going on outside.
You are all good, man.
Thank you.
That 9 3/4. There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, and then Murphy.
No, my first Gen Con experience as well, and to kind of jump into it with something that exciting going on might have actually colored Gen Con for the rest of my life. That I don't know that anything else quite measures up to walking into a room and seeing that many people lined up for a game that I had something to do with. It was really, really exciting, and people were just flooding in. One line for play testing, one line for picking up your copy of the game, and to see people realize that they had to make that choice because they might not be able to do both of those things today was really something else.
Well, and I remember, I would sit down with our marketing manager at night, and we'd re-diagram the booth on a napkin over and over again, trying to figure out the best way to make those two lines work. Because the poor Gen Con staff kept saying, you guys, you got to keep these crowds under control. We're like, we're trying. We didn't expect this. We had never had a plan in place for crowds before at a Gen Con.
Yeah, that was crazy times. The booths were really fun because we had the great hall going on. We had the big tables. Everybody was dressed up. And then the next year with Monster Box, it was all Forbidden Forest and really spooky. It's been pretty fun to kind of dive into that. How do we get Hogwarts, relayed onto the table, which is great. So kind of going into it, we've got a point where we battle Death Eaters, we battle Voldemort, we work together and do all these different things. And sometimes it's more about the students and like how they grow. When you were looking at the base game and then the expansions, right, where it adds Harry and Ron, Hermione and Neville, and they grow from like base to then game 4 and then game 6 is right where they
3 and 7.
Yep. There you go. I was close.
So close.
What kind of things did you look at when having their abilities grow? What did you want to make sure that you were covering in that on the game?
We wanted to make sure, first of all, that the abilities felt true to each kid. So, Hermione's a little bit smarter. She knows her wand work. So her ability is tied to how well she does her spell work. Versus Ron is a little bit, more unpredictable. So his is tied to his attacking ability. He's more likely to go out there and just punch somebody in the face, I would think. But we wanted to make sure that when you first got your ability, you learned how to use it, but it was a small effect. And you're like, okay, I know how to do this. I heal somebody else, I get this. I do this, I get that. And suddenly when you get to game 7 and you can do it really well, you're like, whoa, I didn't realize I could get even better at this skill. And it was all about growing up and maturing as these kids. And what I love is those cards grew up with them. So the very first cards that you see in the box that are your hero pictures are, these year 1 newbie students that just got their Hogwarts letter and showed up and put a sorting hat on their head. And they're those very young kids. And by the time you get to game 7, those Hogwarts is in flames behind you. They're battle scarred. They've got soot on their faces. And they're like, okay, now I am ready for what's going to come to happen at me.
I think one of the best things about those character ability cards is that as you're learning the game, sometimes you need a little bit of guidance. And when you're first learning box 1, the characters don't have any abilities. And that's okay because you're just sort of learning how to pick up cards and add them to your deck and the process of attacking the villains. And game 1 is built so that it's really difficult to lose. So it doesn't matter if you build your deck right. Whereas as the villains get stronger and more challenging, you kind of have to have some direction and think, okay, what is my strategy? What cards am I picking up? And what are my goals for my deck? And I think that having those character cards that have some abilities that say, hey, Neville, focus on healing. Hey, Hermione, focus on picking up spells. That really gives those players a little bit more direction and guidance as to which cards they want to buy from the Hogwarts deck as they play the game.
Yeah, I really like that in general as a learning tool in games. Is like, for experienced gamers, you're going to kind of default to like, okay, let's think through some strategy and how I want to build my deck, and do I want a specialization, or are we all going to generalize? But I think, for a game that's aimed at fans who maybe never played a strategy hobby game before, having that piece, right, that says, maybe try this, like maybe this is your direction, like this character's ability is geared towards healing, so if you start racking up all cards that do healing, you'll just exponentially increase your ability to do that, and that's your role. Or some people look at it, and I think it's interesting, they're like, oh well, I've got that squared away because I have an ability that kind of leans towards that, and once I get that going, then I can check that box and diversify and go into attack and other aspects of the play. But I do like that without it saying in the rules, like, here are the strategy tips and this is how you should play this game, the game itself kind of pushes you gently in a direction. And it's interesting to see, like, as people discuss how they play and how their group got through different boxes, it's like, oh, well, I always play this character and I take this ability and I play this way. And other people are like, yeah, I take that character, but I like to do it this way, and kind of counter that because, like, I want to go against the grain a little bit and make it feel like, I guess, like more clever or more like original, of like, okay, the game pushed me that way, but I tried it this way because I wanted to experiment and see what would happen. And that's really fun to watch.
So are there, oh my gosh, I had my question and I totally just blanked on it. Are there any characters that didn't make it into the game that you wanted to have in the game? I don't know if we can say that or not, but I'm going to ask anyway.
Is Mundungus in there anywhere?
He made it into Defense Against the Dark Arts.
Okay.
He's not in any of the expansions, and he's definitely not in the core game.
He's in Death Eaters Rising too.
He is in Death Eaters Rising. And
Yep.
in that one, I always made a special effort to grab him whenever I could, just because he's a Fletcher. No strategic specific reason I wanted him. It was just that if he came up, the game basically went on pause for me, and I did nothing but go after Mundungus.
He's your Dumbledore.
So, yeah, he's my Dumbledore. So I have to remember now, next time I play Defense Against the Dark Arts, abandon all else and just focus on getting Mundungus.
There you go. You've got a goal now in life. For me, it was the playable characters, because we had a big debate. We sat around the table for weeks on end discussing, do we bring in 2 guys and 2 girls to play as? So if we have Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who are the core 3, should that last character that you play as be one of, the other really strong female heroes? And we're like, yes and no. And we had such a big debate as to who would it be? Can you bring this character in? And we talked about Luna Lovegood, who becomes a playable character in the Monster Box of Monsters. And it's like, yeah, but we don't really meet her at the beginning. She's sorted into Ravenclaw. She's not sorted into Gryffindor. So that didn't feel right. Do we add Ginny Weasley? She's part of the story from the very beginning, but she doesn't go to Hogwarts until a year later. So she didn't feel quite right. So we wanted to add in somebody who was a hero, who in their own right, earned the spot as to be called hero. And so adding in Neville was a very interesting choice that people didn't like, that I love, because he really is the hero. I mean, he pulls out the sword out of the Sorting Hat in the last movie, and with a flick gets rid of the last Horcrux that was needed to be gotten rid of. And you're like,
spoilers,
wow.
No.
He hopefully by now you know this.
No.
But I mean, he stands up and he becomes, this really awesome character. And the funny thing is I was rooting on the side of, no, we don't need as many playable female characters. But that said, my favorite characters in the game are all the girls. I think that they have so many unique powers. They are so strong, and you know, as a woman, I wanted to really embrace what they bring to the table. So I guess that's not who's not in the game, but that's really about who is.
No,
but
that's great. That's great.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing with every, I think, game we've done, right? Is like, can we add another playable character, right? So adding in Luna, or when we get into Death Eaters Rising, where there's 6, you know, playable characters to choose from, and we had debate then too. Is like, okay, do we stick with the same thing, or do we finally put in some adult like characters from the Order of the Phoenix who people want to play as? And it's interesting to work with an IP where there are so many memorable characters that people connect with, where you have to have this debate, right? Like, because there are some IPs where like there is a hero, right? Like there's Batman, everybody loves Batman, and then there's some other good guys that are part of his crew that people like, but everybody likes Batman the best, right? And so you have that, it's a different debate. But with Harry Potter, it's like we have all these awesome characters we can put as the playables. How do you choose? And no matter who you choose, there's somebody out there going, you still didn't get my favorite, you know, and that's hard because we want everybody to have that sort of experience. But one of the pieces that's always been like, there's a whole bunch of reasons why we can't put this character in related to the films, but I wish we could have a Peeves card. Like that's my one, like, you know, he's not in the films, but like I just feel like some kind of combo between Peeves and Fred and George Weasley would just be a really cool thing to have in the game. Like just get that trio of mischief together and have them do what they do. And I think that would be a fun thing to have somewhere, but unfortunately.
I have a 5-year-old you can borrow if you really want the Peeves experience while you play the game.
It's a very rare expansion pack.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's really fun that we get to do this, right? And I think I'm really excited for everybody seeing Charms and Potions coming out. The board game community, the online community, they all love Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle. It's really cool to see all the different things we talked about during this. But in the last 3 months, we've also seen a lot of people pick up this game for the first time. You know, and it's getting to a whole new audience because the Harry Potter fandom is much larger than the board game fandom as a whole. So this game provides kind of a nice, you know, bridge between those two things, which is kind of one of the things we do with the op, which is always fun. So what are some tips, like this is some light tips you would give to somebody picking up the game for the first time? What would you recommend them as they play through?
I think be aware that every card made it into that game for a reason. Even somebody like, oh boy, why can't I think of his name now? The dark arts teacher from the second year.
Lockhart?
Oh,
Lockhart.
yeah.
Yes. A lot of players look at him the first time and go, why would I want this card? And then really there's some very cool strategies you can play with Gilderoy Lockhart, given that there are other cards that let you discard cards. And he, in a lot of ways, mitigates the downside of those cards and makes them all upside. So if you're looking at a card and you can't figure out why it's good, you just haven't found it yet.
Playing as Hermione, especially in a 4-player game, learn to use Beetles the Bard to give influence to everybody at the table. It is so easy to just say, ooh, I can have 2 influence for myself, I'll take it. But really make that choice strategically, and more often than not, you want to put influence into other players' hands so that everybody can get great cards. And so that's another thing that it's, you know, it's hard for new people who want to do that or to see the value of it.
Well, that kind of leads into what I was thinking, which is when you're playing a game like this, where it's, you know, especially if you're learning it for the first time and maybe deck builders are a little bit newer to you as a fan, or even if you've played a bunch of them, but haven't played Hogwarts Battle before, as you're learning the game, the communication with the other people you're playing with is really important, because they may be seeing combos and have cards in their hand or in their decks that you aren't reading up close and maybe don't know how they work as well. And if you're not paying attention to that, you can miss some opportunities and some synergies of how you can set up another player to have a really successful turn, or how they maybe can help you, or how, you know, if everybody's focused on, I'm going to build the attack deck and nobody's doing healing, or trying to manage the control on the locations, you might find that you're basically creating an opening for the villains to steamroll you in one particular area. So that communication between players and hearing out how everybody can contribute is really important, especially as you get into the harder boxes, whether it's later in the core game or like box 1 and monster box. If you want to get through those, it's really going to be essential that like everybody's weighing in and giving thoughts and sharing what their deck can do and how they can help.
Cool. Those are all good advice and tactics. And if you want to find out more about this, first off, thank you for watching our panel. We were glad that we could have this discussion about Harry Potter, Hogwarts Battle, and gaming in the wizarding world. But we have so much more to share about our games too, so be sure to follow us on the Games. We'll have more coming out for our Charms and Potions expansion and for House Cup competition. So we are always excited for more Harry Potter gaming on the table. Be sure to find us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube, and on Twitch. And thank you so much for watching. Cool.
Thank you.
Bye.